In the West Wing, where the air is often thick with the frantic energy of the immediate, there has always been a lingering frustration with the limits of what is politically possible. For Donald Trump, the border was never merely a line on a map. It was a stage, a symbol, a place where power could be projected and narrative could be controlled. But walls are static, they are passive. And in a worldview built around dominance and motion, passivity is failure. What we are witnessing now is a pivot away from stillness and toward force, a redefinition of what the border fight is meant to be. For years, inside the Pentagon and the National Security Council, a question floated quietly through classified briefings and policy drafts. What if drug cartels were treated not as criminal enterprises, but as military enemies? The idea was usually dismissed as impractical, legally dangerous, diplomatically explosive. The adults in the room, as they were often called, warned that such a move would blur lines that American power had carefully maintained for generations. And when executive will meet institutional hesitation, hesitation rarely wins. The order to escalate against foreign drug cartels represents more than a policy adjustment. It is a reimagining of the American presidency's relationship with sovereignty, law enforcement, and war itself. Shift is philosophical. We move from the era of warrants and extradition hearings into the language of targets and neutralization. The cartel leader is no longer a suspect to arrest. He becomes an enemy to eliminate. To understand the magnitude of this transformation, you have to understand Washington's internal friction. For decades, the separation between military action and domestic policing has been treated as sacred. It is written into law, embedded into doctrine, and drilled into officers from their first day in uniform. The armed forces fight wars, police enforce laws. Crossing that boundary is not just controversial, it is existential. Generals fear missions that lack clean definitions of victory. Drug wars are messy. They are political. They drag soldiers into moral gray zones where success cannot be measured in territory captured or flags raised. But the fentanyl crisis has shattered the old reluctance. Tens of thousands of deaths every year have reframed the debate. What was once seen as a criminal justice issue has been recast as a national survival issue. Inside the administration, the argument hardened, traditional methods failed. Diplomatic negotiations, joint policing effort, judicial reform initiatives all too slow, too fragile, too dependent on foreign cooperation. To those shaping the new doctrine, bureaucracy is not a safeguard, it is an obstacle, and obstacles are meant to be pushed aside. Designating cartels as terrorist organizations is the legal mechanism that makes escalation possible. It is a technical classification with enormous consequences. Once a group is labeled a foreign terrorist entity, the rules change. The battlefield expands. The executive branch gains authorities originally designed for wartime enemies. Surveillance intensifies. Targeting threshold shifts. Operations that would be illegal in a policing framework become permissible under the laws of armed conflict. This is what alarms constitutional scholars and excites hardliners in equal measure. The designation opens a door that cannot easily be closed. It suggests that civilian criminal network can be folded into the architecture of war. And if that logic holds, the boundary between domestic crime and international conflict becomes porous. Today, it is cartel. Tomorrow, it could be any network labeled a threat to national security. Operationally, the implications are immediate. Intelligence assets built to track extremist groups can be redirected toward cartel network. High-altitude drones, signals intercept platforms, cyber intrusion unit tools forged in the war on terror become instruments of counter-narcotic warfare. The language is sanitized. Officials speak of interdiction, disruption, neutralization, but behind the euphemisms is a willingness to contemplate direct action inside sovereign territory that raises the most volatile issue of all, Mexico. Cooperation between the United States and Mexico has always been delicate, built on shared intelligence and uneasy trust. A unilateral military posture risks shattering that balance. Even the suggestion that American forces could operate independently inside another nation challenges the core principle of sovereignty. Diplomats warn that such a move could collapse years of coordination, making long-term enforcement harder, not easier. Yet the administration's calculus is driven less by diplomatic comfort than by domestic optics. Strength must be visible. Action must be dramatic. The policy is engineered not only to disrupt cartel logistics, but to project an image of decisive leadership. It is a doctrine rooted in the belief that hesitation invites escalation, and that overwhelming force resets the terms of engagement. History offers warning. The United States has previously launched military operations justified by drug enforcement or border security. Some achieved tactical success but produced strategic ambiguity. Cartel structures are decentralized. Destroying one node rarely eliminates the network. It often fragments it, creating smaller, more volatile groups. Violence disperses instead of disappearing. The battlefield becomes permanent. What emerges is a hybrid conflict, part crime war, part counterterrorism campaign, a conflict without a clear endpoint. Once the machinery of military authorization is activated, it tends to persist. Emergency powers normalize. Temporary measures extend. The logic of perpetual threat sustains perpetual readiness. At its core, this escalation is not just about narcotics, it is about power. It tests the elasticity of executive authority and the resilience of democratic safeguards. Can a president transform a law enforcement crisis into a military theater through classification alone? Can executive action redraw the limits of sovereignty without congressional consensus? These questions are not abstract. They shape the architecture of American governance. Supporters argue the scale of the crisis demands extraordinary measures. They see overdose death as an ongoing attack on the population, an assault that requires a wartime response. Critics counter that militarizing a public health disaster mistakes symptoms for causes. Supply can be disrupted, but demand regenerates. Weapons can destroy labs, but they cannot dismantle addiction. And yet, politics rarely waits for perfect solutions. It rewards visible movement. A missile strike is more cinematic than a prevention program. A deployment is more dramatic than a reform bill. The administration is wagering that voters measure commitment in spectacle as much as in outcome. The danger lies in precedent. Once executive power expands under the banner of emergency, it rarely contracts willingly. The tools built to fight monsters can outlive them. And when they do, they become part of the permanent state available to future leaders with different priorities, different enemies, different definitions of threat. The cartels are brutal organizations. Their violence is real, their reach is undeniable. But the method chosen to confront them may reshape American power long after any individual kingpin falls. In pursuing decisive victory, the state risks redefining itself, trading procedural restraint for operational speed, trading legal clarity for tactical flexibility. The question is no longer whether the United States can wage this kind of war. It is whether it should. Because once the line between policing and warfare dissolves, it may never fully return. And the nation that emerges on the other side may look stronger, louder, more kinetic, but also less constrained, less cautious, and permanently closer to the edge of executive absolutism.